They claimed she was too fragile for the harsh realities of their world, yet they threw her into the snow with nothing but a thin shawl and a broken heart. The Bennet family thought that by locking the iron gates of Harrow Creek Manor, they had silenced their scandalous secret forever. They believed Miss Adeline Bennet would simply fade into the white oblivion of a December blizzard. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot that the road to hell is often paved with ice, and sometimes the devil himself drives the carriage. When the feared Duke of Harrington stopped his horses that night, he didn't offer salvation. He offered a weapon. The wind howled through the valley of Derbyshire like a wounded beast, tearing at the thin muslin of Adeline Bennet's dress. It was a gown meant for a parlour, for tea times and polite conversation, not for the biting, merciless grip of a blizzard. Adeline stumbled, her knees sinking into a fresh drift of snow. The cold was no longer a sensation. It was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. Behind her, the towering iron gates of Harrow Creek Manor were already disappearing into the white haze, but the sound of the heavy latch clicking shut still echoed in her mind. "You are a stain on this house, Adeline." Her stepmother, Madame Beatrice, had sneered, her face twisted in a mask of triumph. "With your father gone, there is no one to protect a penniless leech. Go. Find your charity elsewhere." Adeline had begged. She had lowered herself to her knees on the Persian rug in the foyer, grasping at the hem of her stepsister Lydia's skirt. But Lydia had only laughed, kicking her hand away as if she were a stray mongrel. "Don't look at me, sister," Lydia had said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "The Duke of Harrington is coming to the winter ball next week. We can't have a disgraced orphan moping about, ruining my chances. You understand, don't you? You simply don't fit the aesthetic of our future." The servants had looked away, shame burning in their eyes, but none dared defy Madame Beatrice. And so, Adeline was shoved out the scullery door, the wood slamming against her back with a finality that shattered her world. Now, an hour later, Adeline could no longer feel her toes. The numbness was creeping up her legs, a seductive drowsiness urging her to lie down and sleep. She knew that sleep meant death. She forced one foot in front of the other, aiming for the faint outline of the old miller's road, hoping against hope that a traveller might pass. But who travelled in this weather? Only fools and desperate men. Adeline fell again. This time her hands scraped against a hidden rock beneath the snow, tearing the skin. She stared at the bead of bright red blood welling on her palm. It looked alien against the stark whiteness of the world. "Father," she whispered, her voice cracking, "why did you leave me with them?" Her father, Thomas Bennet, had been a kind man, but weak in matters of the heart. He had allowed Beatrice to slowly poison his mind against his own daughter, and when he died of a sudden fever 2 weeks ago, he had left no will. Everything, the estate, the money, Adeline's dowry, had passed to Beatrice by default. Adeline curled into a ball beneath the twisted roots of an ancient oak tree near the roadside. The wind whipped her hair across her face, freezing the tears to her cheeks. She closed her eyes, the image of the warm hearth at the manor taunting her. She imagined Lydia sipping hot cocoa, likely planning which gown to wear for the Duke. The darkness began to close in, the edges of her vision turning grey. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. It wasn't her heart. It was a rhythmic, heavy sound vibrating through the frozen ground. Adeline's eyes fluttered open. Through the swirling snow, 2 bright lanterns pierced the gloom like dragon eyes. The thunder of hooves grew louder, crushing the silence. A carriage. It was moving fast, too fast for the ice. It was a massive black construct, devoid of crests or colours, pulled by 4 nightmare black stallions that seemed to breathe smoke in the frigid air. Adeline tried to shout, but her throat was frozen. She tried to stand, but her legs refused. In a last, desperate bid for life, she dragged herself from the tree roots and rolled toward the road, waving a pale, trembling hand. The lead horse shrieked as the driver pulled hard on the reins. The carriage skidded, the wheels locking and carving deep grooves into the ice. It came to a halt mere inches from Adeline's outstretched fingers. Silence returned, heavier than before. The door of the carriage did not open immediately. Adeline lay there, panting, her vision blurring. Was this her saviour? Or had she merely stopped a traveller who would curse her for the delay and ride on? The handle turned. The door swung open. A boot, polished to a mirror shine despite the weather, stepped onto the snow. Then another. A man emerged. He was tall, wrapped in a heavy charcoal greatcoat with a high collar that obscured half his face. He wore no hat, allowing the snow to settle on hair as dark as the midnight sky. He didn't rush to her. He walked with a terrifying, predatory calm. He stopped over her, looking down with eyes that were cold, calculating, and piercingly blue, the color of the ice that was killing her. "Well," the man said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated in Adeline's chest. "It seems the Bennets have finally decided to take out the trash." Adeline frowned, confusion warring with her exhaustion. He knew who she was. "Help! Me!" she wheezed. The man crouched down. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her like a scientist examining a rare, dying insect. "Why?" he asked simply. "Please, give me one reason why I should dirty my carriage with a frozen corpse," he said, his tone devoid of pity. "You are Adeline Bennet, daughter of Thomas, stepdaughter of the vile Beatrice. You have nothing. You are nothing." Adeline's survival instinct flared, a spark of anger igniting in the freezing void of her chest. She glared up at him, her teeth chattering. "Because," she rasped, forcing the words through her numb lips. "Because, if I die, she wins." The man went still. The corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "Spite," he murmured. "A powerful fuel, much warmer than wood." He stood up abruptly and signaled to the driver. "Get her inside. Try not to break her. She's fragile, but she may yet be useful." The interior of the carriage was warmer than any room Adeline had ever known. It smelled of expensive tobacco, leather, and something sharp, like pine and iron. Adeline was slumped against the velvet squabs, wrapped in a thick fur rug the driver had thrown over her. She was shivering violently as her body began to thaw, the return of sensation bringing with it a burning pain in her extremities. Across from her sat the stranger. He had removed his greatcoat, revealing a severely tailored black suit. He watched her shivering with detached interest, tapping a silver-headed cane against the floor of the carriage. "Drink this," he commanded, extending a silver flask. Adeline's hands were shaking too much to hold it. With a sigh of impatience, he leaned forward, unstopped the flask and pressed it to her lips. The liquid was brandy, fire in liquid form. It burned her throat, making her cough, but it spread a glorious heat through her belly. "Who?" she coughed, wiping her mouth. "Who are you?" He capped the flask slowly. "I am the man your stepmother fears most in this world, Miss Bennet, and the man your father owed a great debt to." Adeline's eyes widened. You are Valerius Harrington, the Duke of Harrington, the feared Duke. Stories about him were whispered in parlours across the county. They said he had doubled his family's fortune through ruthless trade deals. They said he had driven his own cousin to madness over a land dispute. They said his heart was made of the same stone as his castle walls. "I am," Valerius replied. "And you, Miss Bennet, are currently interrupting my journey to London." "I didn't ask to be here," Adeline snapped, the brandy giving her courage. "You could have left me." "I could have," Valerius agreed. "But then I saw the look in your eyes. You hate them. Beatrice and that vapid creature, Lydia." "They took everything from me," Adeline whispered, looking down at her torn, bloodied hands. "My home, my name, my dignity." "Dignity is a luxury for those with full bellies," Valerius said sharply. "Right now, you are a beggar. If I drop you off at the next village, you will be dead within the week or working in a brothel. Is that the fate Thomas Bennet's daughter desires?" Adeline stiffened. "No." "Good." Valerius leaned back, crossing his long legs. "Then I have a proposition. A business arrangement." Adeline stared at him. "Business?" "I have no money, Your Grace. I have no dowry." Beatrice ensured that. "I have more money than God, Miss Bennet. I do not need your coin," Valerius scoffed. "I need a distraction, a weapon, and most importantly, I need a wife." The carriage hit a bump, but Adeline felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. "A wife?" "Don't look so scandalized. I'm not asking for your affection, and I certainly don't offer mine," Valerius said coldly. "I require a duchess. My board of directors is getting twitchy. They believe a bachelor duke is unstable. They want me settled to ensure the lineage. Furthermore, there is a certain social circle I wish to dismantle. Your stepmother is clawing her way into it." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "Beatrice wants Lydia to marry into high society. She wants to be the mother of a peer. Imagine her face, Miss Bennet, when she walks into the winter ball next week and sees you." Adeline's breath hitched. "Me? You?" Valerius continued, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "Not as the starving orphan she threw out, but as Her Grace, the Duchess of Harrington, draped in diamonds that cost more than her entire estate, standing on my arm, untouchable." The image flashed in Adeline's mind. Beatrice choking on her champagne. Lydia, pale with envy. The servants who had turned their backs, bowing to her. "Why me?" Adeline asked, her voice trembling. "You could have anyone." "I could," Valerius admitted. "I could marry a princess from Prussia or a wealthy heiress from New York. But they would bore me. They don't know what it is to be thrown away. They don't have the fire of survival in them. You do. You have a vendetta, Adeline. And so do I. You have a vendetta against my family?" "That is a story for another time," Valerius said dismissively. "The offer is simple. Marry me. Be the Duchess of Harrington in public. Run my household. Play the part. In private, we live separate lives. You will have unlimited funds, protection, and the power to crush those who hurt you. In exchange, I get a wife who is too indebted to me to ever betray me, and who is smart enough to play the game." He extended a gloved hand. "Well, Adeline, do you want to go back to the snow? Or do you want to own the winter?" Adeline looked at his hand. It was large, powerful, and dangerous. Taking it meant selling her soul to the devil. It meant entering a world of sharks and vipers with a man who admitted he had no heart. But then she remembered the sound of the door locking behind her. She remembered Beatrice's laugh. Adeline reached out. Her cold, blood-stained fingers grasped his leather glove. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steel. "But I have one condition." Valerius raised an eyebrow, amused. "A condition? You are in no position to bargain, little mouse." "I am not a mouse," Adeline said, meeting his gaze. "If I am to be your duchess, I will not be a prop. I want Harrow Creek Manor. I want to hold the deed to the house that threw me out." Valerius stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, a genuine smile touched his lips. It was terrifying. "Done," he said. The journey to the Duke's estate took 3 days. For Adeline, it was a blur of fevered dreams and the rhythmic rocking of the carriage. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the heat radiating from the fur rugs and the occasional stoic presence of Valerius Harrington, reading documents by the light of a hanging lantern. He did not coddle her, but neither did he let her succumb to the cold. Once, when a violent cough racked her body, she felt a cool hand against her forehead, checking her temperature with the clinical detachment of a doctor. When the carriage finally slowed, Adeline forced her eyes open. They were passing through gates that made the ones at Harrow Creek look like garden fences. Massive stone pillars topped with gargoyles guarded the entrance to Greystone Park. The estate was not a home, it was a fortress. The main house was a sprawling Gothic structure of grey stone, rising from the snow-covered landscape like a jagged mountain range. "We have arrived," Valerius said, closing his ledger. "Pull yourself together, Miss Bennet. Weakness is not currency here." The carriage halted in a cobblestone courtyard. Footmen in dark liveries swarmed the vehicle. Adeline stepped out, her legs trembling, and the biting wind immediately slapped her face. But before she could collapse, a formidable woman in a severe grey dress descended the stone steps. "Your Grace," the woman said, curtsying stiffly. "Mrs. Caldwell," Valerius acknowledged, stripping off his gloves. "This is Miss Adeline Bennet. She is to be installed in the East Wing. Get the physician. Bathe her. Feed her. Burn those rags she is wearing." "And Mrs. Caldwell?" "Yes, Your Grace. Prepare the bridal suite. We marry in 2 days." Mrs. Caldwell didn't even blink. "Very good, sir." Adeline was swept away. The next 48 hours were a transformative torture. She was scrubbed in steaming copper tubs until her skin was raw, the scent of lavender and expensive soap replacing the smell of fear and frost. A physician, Dr. Arris, tended to her scraped hands and the bruising on her back, muttering about malnutrition and exposure. She was fed broths that tasted richer than any holiday feast she had ever known. But through it all, she felt like a doll being repaired for a shelf. On the evening before the wedding, Valerius summoned her to his study. Adeline wore a simple gown of deep blue velvet that Mrs. Caldwell had provided. It was warm and soft, fitting her slender frame perfectly. She knocked on the heavy oak door and entered. The study was a cavern of books and shadows. A fire roared in the hearth, illuminating Valerius as he stood by the window, looking out at the dark, snowy grounds. "You look less like a corpse," he remarked without turning around. "Thank you, Your Grace. That is a high compliment coming from you," Adeline replied, her voice steady. Valerius turned, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Good. You have a tongue. You will need it." He walked to his massive mahogany desk and slid a thick stack of parchment toward her. "The marriage contract. Read it." Adeline approached the desk. She picked up the papers. It was a cold, brutal document. It stipulated that Adeline would receive an allowance of £5,000 a year, a fortune, and full authority over the household staff. In the event of Valerius's death, she would inherit the dower house and a significant trust. In exchange, she surrendered her autonomy. She was to attend all social functions he deemed necessary. She was to produce an heir within 3 years. She was never to speak of their arrangement to a living soul. And there, at the bottom, was the clause she had demanded. Upon the marriage, the deed and title to Harrow Creek Manor shall be purchased by the Duke and transferred solely to the Duchess. "It is generous," Adeline said softly. It is a transaction, Valerius corrected. There is one more thing you must understand, Adeline. The world you are entering, my world, is not polite. My business rivals want to see me fail. The social elite want to see me humbled. They will attack you to get to me. They will whisper about your background. They will say you are a gold digger who trapped me. Adeline looked up, her jaw setting. Let them talk. I have survived freezing to death in a ditch. I can survive a few whispers. Valerius moved closer, his presence overwhelming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring box. He snapped it open. Inside sat a sapphire the size of a quail's egg, surrounded by a halo of jagged, brilliant-cut diamonds. It was beautiful, but it looked sharp, like a weapon. This is the Harrington sapphire, he said, taking her hand. His fingers were warm. It has been worn by 4 duchesses. 2 of them went mad. 1 ran away. The last one, my mother, died wearing it. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was heavy, weighing down her hand. Why tell me this? Adeline asked, looking at the blue fire on her finger. So you know that you are not just marrying a man, Valerius whispered, leaning down so his breath brushed her ear. You are marrying a curse. Are you sure you want to go through with this? The gate is still open. Adeline looked at the ring, then at the fire. She thought of Lydia's sneer. She thought of her father's grave, likely covered in snow, unvisited. She looked Valerius in the eye. Close the gate, Your Grace. I'm not going anywhere. The wedding was devoid of romance. It took place in the private chapel on the estate grounds, a cold stone structure that smelled of old incense and damp earth. There were no flowers, no choir, and no guests. The only witnesses were Mrs. Caldwell and Valerius's personal solicitor, a wiry man named Mr. Finch. The priest, an elderly man with shaking hands, rushed through the Latin rites as if he were afraid the roof might collapse. Adeline wore a gown of silver silk, high-necked and long-sleeved. It was elegant, but austere. As she repeated the vows, promising to obey and honor, she felt a strange dissociation. She was acting a part. The Adeline Bennet who cried over romance novels was dead. This was the Duchess of Harrington, a woman forged in ice. I now pronounce you man and wife, the priest mumbled. Valerius did not kiss her. He simply took her hand, bowed over it, and brushed his lips against her knuckles. Duchess, he said, the title sounding like a military rank. Duke, she replied. The dinner that followed was a silent affair. They sat at opposite ends of a dining table, long enough to seat 30. The only sound was the clinking of silver against china and the ticking of the grandfather clock. When the meal concluded, Valerius stood. I have work to attend to. Mrs. Caldwell will show you to your chambers. The master suite adjoins yours, but the connecting door is locked. I value my solitude, and I assume you value yours. It was a rejection, plain and simple. Despite knowing this was a business arrangement, Adeline felt a sting of humiliation. He treated her like an acquisition he had already lost interest in. Good night, Your Grace, she said, holding her head high. She went to her room, a lavish chamber dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in gold brocade, and dismissed the maids. She paced the floor, the heavy sapphire ring twisting on her finger. She was safe. She was rich, and she was utterly alone. The next morning, the reality of her new position began. Adeline was in the morning room, trying to make sense of the household ledgers Mrs. Caldwell had provided, when the butler, Arthur, cleared his throat at the door. Your Grace, he said, his face impassive. You have a visitor. Adeline frowned. A visitor? But we have announced nothing. Who is it? Madame Genevieve Eccleston. Adeline's blood ran cold. She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. Genevieve was the widow of a viscount, a woman of immense wealth and influence in London society. She was also rumoured to have been Valerius's mistress for years, constantly vying to become the Duchess. "Show her in," Adeline said, smoothing her skirts and sitting up straighter. The first test, she thought. Genevieve swept into the room like a storm cloud. She was stunning. Tall, with raven hair and lips painted a scandalous shade of red. She wore a riding habit of emerald green that cost more than Adeline's father's entire estate. She didn't curtsy. She stood in the centre of the room, stripping off her leather riding gloves, her dark eyes scanning Adeline with open contempt. "So," Genevieve said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "The rumours are true. Valerius has actually gone and married the stray he picked up off the road." Adeline remained seated. "Good morning to you too, Madame Eccleston. Would you like tea?" Genevieve laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Tea? I didn't come for tea, you foolish girl. I came to see the disaster for myself. Do you have any idea what you've done? You're a Bennet. Your family is a laughing stock. Your stepmother owes money to half the merchants in Derbyshire." "I am a Harrington now," Adeline said calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You are a placeholder," Genevieve spat, stepping closer. "Valerius married you because he needed a brood mare with no connections to annoy him. He doesn't want you. He will never want you. He spent last night at his club in town, did he not? Or perhaps he was occupied elsewhere?" The insinuation hung in the air. Adeline didn't know if it was true, but the pain of the locked door last night flared up. Genevieve saw the flicker of doubt in Adeline's eyes and smiled triumphantly. "Oh, you poor thing," Genevieve cooed. "Pack your bags, darling. Take the settlement and run while you can. The winter ball is in 3 days. If you walk into that ballroom wearing the Harrington jewels, the wolves will tear you apart. I will lead the pack." Adeline looked at the woman. She saw the jealousy, the cruelty, the entitlement, and something inside her snapped. The same anger that had kept her alive in the snow surged forward. Adeline stood up slowly. She was shorter than Genevieve, but in that moment she felt 10 feet tall. "Are you finished?" Adeline asked softly. Genevieve blinked, surprised by the tone. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you were finished barking," Adeline said, clasping her hands in front of her. "Because if you are, I have instructions for you." "Arthur?" The butler stepped forward. "Yes, Your Grace." "Please inform the stable master that Madame Eccleston's horse is to be brought around immediately." "She is leaving." Genevieve gasped. "You can't throw me out. I am Valerius's oldest friend." "You are a guest in my house," Adeline said, her voice dropping to a steely register that sounded frighteningly like Valerius. "And you have insulted the Duchess of Harrington. If you ever speak to me with such disrespect again, I will ensure that you are uninvited from every social event in London. My husband owns the bank that holds the mortgage on your estate, does he not, Genevieve?" It was a guess, a wild guess based on a ledger entry Adeline had seen 10 minutes ago. Genevieve's face went pale, the colour drained from her red lips. She had overplayed her hand. You wouldn't dare," Genevieve whispered. "Try me," Adeline challenged. "Now, get out." Genevieve stared at her with pure hatred, then turned on her heel and stormed out, shoving past Arthur. Adeline stood rigid until the front door slammed. Then her knees gave way, and she sank back onto the sofa, trembling. "Impressive." The voice came from the doorway. Adeline jumped. Valerius was leaning against the frame, his arms crossed. He had been there. He had heard. I didn't know you were home," Adeline stammered. Valerius walked into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked fascinated. "I came back to retrieve a file," he said. "I expected to find you crying. Genevieve has reduced seasoned diplomats to tears." "She was rude," Adeline said, trying to steady her hands. "She was vicious," Valerius corrected. "And you gutted her. You found her weakness, her debt, and you struck without hesitation." He stopped in front of her. For the first time, he reached out and touched her chin, tilting her face up. His blue eyes searched hers. "I told you I needed a weapon," Valerius murmured, a strange intensity in his voice. "It seems I chose wisely." "She said I would be torn apart at the ball," Adeline whispered. "She was wrong," Valerius said. He dropped his hand, his expression hardening into determination. "Come with me. We have work to do. If Genevieve is planning a war, then we must arm you properly." "Arm me?" "Yes." Valerius grinned, a sharp, dangerous smile. "We are going to the vault. It is time you met the rest of the family, Jules. And tomorrow, we go to the ball, and we will make sure that when you enter that room, Beatrice and Lydia don't just feel envy. They will feel fear." The night of the winter ball arrived with a vengeance, bringing a storm that rattled the windows of Greystone Park. But inside the Duke's carriage, the air was still and heavy with anticipation. Adeline sat opposite Valerius. She felt heavier, not from burden, but from the sheer weight of the diamonds draped around her throat. The Harrington sapphire rested against her collarbone, cold and demanding. Her gown was a masterpiece of revenge. Valerius had ordered a team of French seamstresses to work through the night. It was a deep, midnight blue velvet that appeared almost black in the dim light, cut low across the shoulders to display her porcelain skin and the massive jewels. The skirt was voluminous, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like trapped stars. She did not look like the starving girl in the snow. She looked like a queen of the night. "You are trembling," Valerius observed, his voice cutting through the silence. "I am terrified," Adeline admitted, clutching her fan. "Half the county will be there. Beatrice will be there." "Good," Valerius said. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the carriage darkness. "Let them be terrified. You hold the cards now, Adeline. Remember what we practiced. You do not apologize. You do not explain. You are the Duchess of Harrington. You are the sun, and they are merely planets orbiting you. If they get too close, you burn them." The carriage slowed. They had arrived at the assembly rooms in town. The building was ablaze with light, music spilling out into the snowy street. A line of carriages stretched down the block. But as soon as the footmen saw the black stallions of the Harrington crest, they shouted for the way to be cleared. "Make way! Make way for the Duke of Harrington!" The crowd parted. Adeline's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Valerius stepped out first. The crowd outside gasped at his imposing figure. He turned and extended his hand into the carriage. "Ready?" he asked. Adeline took a deep breath. She thought of the cold wind on her face the night she was exiled. She thought of the hunger. She took his hand. "Ready." She stepped out. A hush rippled through the onlookers. The flash of the sapphire was blinding, even in the lantern light. Valerius placed her hand on his arm, and they ascended the stairs. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of pastel silks, feathers, and gossip. The orchestra was playing a waltz, but the moment the major domo slammed his staff against the floor, the music faltered and died. "His Grace, the Duke of Harrington," the announcer bellowed, his voice echoing to the rafters. He paused for dramatic effect. "And Her Grace, the Duchess of Harrington." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical force. 300 heads turned as one. Adeline kept her chin high, her face a mask of bored indifference, just as Valerius had taught her. She scanned the room. It didn't take long to find them. Near the punch bowl, holding court with a group of minor squires, stood Beatrice and Lydia. Beatrice was wearing a garish crimson dress that was far too young for her. Lydia was in pink, looking like a frosted cake. They were laughing at something, until they looked up. Adeline saw the exact moment recognition hit them. Beatrice's glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the parquet floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. Red wine splashed onto the hem of her dress, but she didn't move. Her mouth hung open, her eyes bulging. Lydia grabbed her mother's arm, her face draining of all color. "Mother!" she hissed, her voice carrying in the quiet room. Is that Adeline?" Valerius leaned down to Adeline, his voice a low rumble. "Walk, slowly." They descended the grand staircase. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, bodies pressing back to give them a wide berth. Whispers began to erupt like wildfires. "Who is she? Is that the Bennet girl? I thought she was dead. Look at those diamonds. Good Lord, look at the Duke." They reached the floor. Instead of leading her to the dance floor, Valerius steered her directly toward the spilled wine and the frozen Bennet women. Adeline felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. She stopped 3 feet from her stepmother. Up close, she could see the cracks in Beatrice's foundation, the heavy powder settling in her wrinkles, the fear in her eyes. "Good evening, stepmother," Adeline said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and carried perfectly to the onlookers. "I trust you have been well since you saw me off?" Beatrice made a choking sound. She looked from Adeline to the terrifying figure of the Duke standing protectively beside her. "Adeline," Beatrice stammered, her composure shattering. "But we were told you had run away with a tinker." We were distraught. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The lie was exposed. "A tinker?" Adeline raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She touched the massive sapphire at her throat. "I'm afraid your information was incorrect, madam. I did not run away. I was collected." "By me," Valerius added, his voice like a blade. He looked at Beatrice with open disgust. "You threw a diamond into the mud, Madam Bennet. I merely picked it up and polished it." Lydia stepped forward, her jealousy overriding her fear. "This is a trick. She's a beggar. You can't marry her. She has no dowry. She has nothing." The crowd gasped at the outburst. Valerius laughed. It was a dark, chilling sound. "She has me, Miss Bennet, and I assure you, my vaults are quite sufficient to cover her lack of dowry. In fact," he signaled to a man standing in the shadows, "Mr. Finch, his solicitor." The thin man stepped forward, holding a thick envelope. "What is this?" Beatrice whispered, her hands shaking. "Adeline," Valerius prompted. Adeline took the envelope. She felt the weight of the deed inside. She looked at Beatrice, then at Lydia, and finally, she looked at the house keys dangling from Beatrice's waist. "We will discuss business later," Adeline said, tucking the envelope into her clutch. "For now, I believe you are causing a scene. Look at your dress, stepmother. You are stained. It really is quite unbecoming for a woman of your station." She used the exact words Beatrice had used on her when she was a child. "Come, Valerius," Adeline said, turning her back on them. "The air in this corner is stagnant." As they walked away, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Valerius swept her onto the floor. As they spun, Adeline saw Beatrice being helped into a chair, fanning herself frantically, while the entire room whispered about the woman who had tried to destroy the new Duchess. "You were magnificent," Valerius whispered in her ear. "I felt sick," Adeline admitted. "No one noticed," he assured her. "But the night is not over. That was the jab. Now comes the knockout punch." The victory at the ball was sweet, but it was merely the appetizer. The main course was served the following morning. Adeline and Valerius did not sleep. They rode the high of the confrontation straight back to the estate, and at dawn the carriage was prepared again. This time they were not going to a party. They were going to Harrow Creek Manor. The snow had stopped, leaving the world bright and blindingly white. As the carriage rolled down the familiar road, Adeline felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was the place where she had been tormented. This was the place she had been exiled from. "You don't have to do this alone," Valerius said, watching her closely. "I can have my men clear the house. You need never step foot inside again." "No," Adeline said, her voice hard. "I need to see it. I need them to know it was me." They pulled up to the iron gates, the same gates that had been locked against her. The gatekeeper, old Thomas, stumbled out of his lodge, his eyes widening as he recognized the Duke's crest. He scrambled to open the gates, bowing low as the carriage swept past. They pulled up to the front door. Adeline stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. She was dressed in a severe black riding habit, looking every inch the executioner. Before they could even knock, the door flew open. Beatrice stood there, still wearing her ruined crimson dress from the night before. She looked haggard, as if she hadn't slept. Lydia was behind her, weeping. "You!" Beatrice shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Adeline. "You ungrateful wretch! How dare you show your face here after the humiliation you caused us last night? Do you know the scandal you've caused? No one will speak to us." "Good morning to you too, Beatrice," Adeline said, walking past her into the foyer. She pulled off her gloves slowly. "I see you haven't packed." "Packed?" Beatrice sputtered, following her. "Why would I pack? This is my house. Your father left it to me." Adeline turned, standing in the center of the cold hallway. The portraits of her ancestors stared down at her. "Actually," Adeline said, signaling to Mr. Finch, who had accompanied them, "he didn't. Father died intestate. The property went to you by default of guardianship, but the estate was heavily leveraged. You haven't paid the mortgage in 3 years, Beatrice. You've been living on credit." Beatrice paled. How do you know that?" "Because the bank that holds your mortgage is a subsidiary of Harrington Holdings," Valerius said, stepping into the light. He loomed over the women like a dark god. "And as of this morning, I have called in the debt." "You can't!" Lydia screamed. "Where will we go?" "I don't care," Valerius said simply. "However," Adeline interrupted, her voice soft but deadly, "my husband is a businessman. He doesn't deal in emotions. But I do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the deed, the document Valerius had promised her in the carriage that first night. "The Duke purchased the debt, and then he sold the property," Adeline explained. "To me. For £1. She held up the paper. "I own Harrow Creek Manor, Beatrice. I own the rugs you are standing on. I own the bed you sleep in. I own the silver you were planning to sell to pay for Lydia's season." Beatrice stared at the paper, her knees buckling. She grabbed the banister for support. "Adeline, please. We are family." "Family?" Adeline laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Family is what keeps you warm when the world is cold. You threw me into a blizzard to die. You told me I was a stain. You told me I didn't fit the aesthetic." Adeline stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Well, Beatrice, I'm afraid you no longer fit the aesthetic of my estate. She turned to the open door. Get out. Now? Beatrice gasped. Right now, Adeline confirmed, just as I was. No coats, no jewels, no luggage, just the clothes on your back. It's freezing outside, Lydia wailed. We'll die. I survived, Adeline said coldly. Perhaps you will too, or perhaps a duke will drive by and save you, though I wouldn't count on it. Lightning rarely strikes twice. You can't be this cruel, Beatrice whispered, tears streaming down her face. I am not being cruel, Adeline said, signaling to the footman. I am simply balancing the scales. Karma, stepmother, has arrived, and she is wearing diamonds. The footman moved forward. Beatrice and Lydia screamed as they were ushered, firmly but not violently, out the door. They stumbled down the steps, their silk shoes sinking into the snow. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them. The sound echoed through the house, a final, thunderous period to the sentence of their lives here. Adeline stood in the silence of the foyer. She looked at her shaking hands. Are you all right? Valerius asked softly behind her. Adeline took a deep breath. She looked around the hall. It didn't look like a prison anymore. It looked empty. I thought I would feel happy, she whispered, but I just feel tired. Revenge is exhausting work, Valerius agreed. He walked over and placed his hands on her shoulders. But it is done. The past is evicted. Now you must decide what to do with the future. Adeline leaned back against him, allowing herself, for the first time, to draw strength from him, not as a partner in crime, but as a man. I don't want to live here, she said suddenly. This house is full of ghosts. Then burn it down, Valerius said, half joking. No, Adeline said, turning to face him. I'll turn it into an orphanage, for girls who have nowhere to go, so no one ever has to walk into the snow alone again. Valerius stared at her. His cold blue eyes softened, a look of genuine respect replacing the calculating assessment. An orphanage, he mused. That will cost a fortune to run. Luckily, Adeline smiled, touching his lapel, I married a man who has more money than God. Valerius laughed, a true, rich sound that surprised them both. He caught her hand and kissed the palm. So you did, Duchess. So you did. But as they stood there, a sudden, urgent knocking came from the side entrance, the servants' entrance. Mrs. Caldwell, who had travelled with them, hurried from the back. She looked pale. Your Grace, she said, holding a letter. A rider just arrived from London. It's urgent. It's about the king. Valerius's smile vanished instantly. He took the letter, broke the seal, and scanned it. His face turned to stone. What is it? Adeline asked, fear prickling her skin. The king is dead, Valerius said, his voice grave. And his brother, the Prince Regent, has challenged the legitimacy of all recent titles granted by the crown, including mine. He looked at Adeline, his eyes dark. Beatrice and Lydia were the least of our problems, Adeline. The real war has just begun. The journey to London was a funeral march compared to the triumphant ride from the ball. The carriage rattled over the frozen cobblestones of the capital, carrying a duke who might soon be a pauper, and a duchess who had only just found her footing. Valerius had spent the journey explaining the gravity of the situation. The Prince Regent, desperate for funds to fuel his lavish lifestyle and the ongoing skirmishes in the colonies, was using the death of the king to purge the peerage. He was targeting titles granted 3 generations ago, titles like the Harringtons, claiming irregularities in the paperwork to seize their assets for the crown. He doesn't care about the title, Valerius spat, staring out at the grey London fog. He wants the mines. He wants the shipping lines. He wants to strip the Harrington name of its gold to pave his own palace. Then we fight him, Adeline said, her hand resting firmly on his knee. This is not a ballroom skirmish with a stepmother, Valerius warned, his eyes weary. This is treason. If we lose, it is not just poverty. It is the Tower. They arrived at Harrington House in Mayfair, but there was no time to rest. A summons was already waiting. They were to appear before the Lord Chancellor, Lord Percival, immediately. The hearing took place in a private chamber within the Palace of Westminster. The room was stiflingly hot, smelling of wax and old parchment. Lord Percival sat behind a high desk, flanked by two clerks scribbling furiously. He was a rat-faced man with watery eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Your Grace," Percival sneered, not bothering to stand. "And, Madam Harrington, I suppose we must drop the Duchess for now, until the review is complete." Valerius went rigid. "Careful, Percival. You speak to my wife." "I speak to a commoner," Percival retorted, shuffling papers. "We have evidence that your grandfather's patent of nobility was forged. Therefore the dukedom is null and void. All assets revert to the crown. You have 24 hours to vacate your properties." It was a lie. A blatant, bureaucratic lie designed to steal a fortune. Valerius stepped forward, his fists clenched. "If you think I will surrender my birthright because of a falsified ledger, you have no choice." Percival slammed his hand on the desk. "The Prince Regent has signed the order. Unless—" He paused, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "Unless, of course, a donation is made. A donation equivalent to, shall we say, 70% of the Harrington liquid assets." It was extortion. Pure and simple. Valerius looked ready to kill. If he paid, the Harrington Empire would be crippled. If he fought, he would be destroyed. No. The voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a diamond cutter. Adeline stepped forward. She did not look at Percival. She looked at the clerk. "Write this down," she commanded. The clerk blinked, looking to Percival. "I said write it down!" Adeline's voice thundered, echoing off the stone walls. She turned to Percival, drawing herself up to her full height. "You speak of assets, Lord Percival. You speak of stripping us bare. But you have forgotten one asset that the crown desperately needs. Public favor." Percival scoffed. "The public?" "Peasants. Peasants who are hungry," Adeline corrected. "Peasants who are tired of a prince who builds pavilions while they starve. My husband and I have just commissioned the opening of the Bennet Harrington Home for Orphans in Derbyshire. It is entirely funded by the Harrington fortune. We have also pledged to subsidize the grain shipments for the coming winter." She pulled a folded newspaper from her clutch, the London Gazette, and slammed it onto Percival's desk. The headline read, "The Duke of the People. Harrington pledges fortune to the poor." Adeline had sent the notice the moment they left Derbyshire. "If you strip Valerius of his title," Adeline said, leaning in, her blue eyes blazing, "you are not just robbing a duke. You are robbing the orphans. You are robbing the starving masses. And I will make sure every man, woman, and child in England knows that the Prince Regent stole the bread from their mouths to buy new curtains." Percival turned pale. He looked at the newspaper. He looked at Valerius, who was staring at his wife with a mixture of shock and awe. "You wouldn't dare," Percival whispered. "This would cause a riot." "I survived a blizzard in a muslin dress, Lord Percival," Adeline smiled, and it was the most dangerous smile Valerius had ever seen. "Do you really think I am afraid of causing a little riot? Go to your prince. Tell him he can have his title, but he will lose his city. Or he can validate the Harrington claim, and we will continue to feed his subjects for him." The room was silent for a long, agonizing minute. Percival wiped sweat from his brow. He knew the political climate was fragile. A martyr duke could topple the monarchy. "I will consult with His Highness," Percival stammered. "The order is suspended. For now." "Permanently," Valerius corrected, stepping up beside Adeline and taking her hand. "We expect the validation by morning. Good day, Percival." They walked out of the palace arm in arm. They didn't speak until they were back in the carriage, the door firmly shut against the world. Valerius looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the smudge of ink on her glove from the newspaper. He saw the fatigue in her eyes. "You saved us," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was ready to burn the city down. You saved it." "I was protecting what is mine," Adeline whispered. "I lost one home, Valerius. I wasn't going to lose another." Valerius reached out and cupped her face. The cold, calculating duke was gone. In his place was a man who had finally found his equal. "The contract," he murmured. "The one we signed. It said we would live separate lives. It said no affection." "I remember," Adeline breathed, her heart racing. "I want to renegotiate," Valerius said. "I don't want a business partner, Adeline. I don't want a duchess for the public. I want you. I want the woman who crawled out of the snow and brought the king's court to its knees." He leaned in, his lips brushing hers. "I love you, Adeline. More than the title. More than the mines. You are the only treasure I have ever been afraid to lose." Adeline closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not tears of cold or pain, but of warmth. "And I love you, Valerius. My monster. My savior." He kissed her then, a searing, desperate kiss that sealed a bond stronger than any legal document. 6 months later. The snow was falling again in Derbyshire, covering the scars of the land, but this time Adeline was not walking through it alone. She stood on the steps of the newly renovated Harrow Creek Manor, now filled with the sound of children's laughter. The orphanage was full. Fires roared in every grate. Valerius came up behind her, wrapping his heavy coat around her shoulders, pulling her back against his chest. "They are happy," he noted, watching 2 young girls build a snowman in the garden. The very garden where Adeline had once begged for her life. "They are safe," Adeline corrected, resting her head on his shoulder. "And they are warm. Thanks to you." Valerius kissed the top of her head. Adeline looked at the iron gates. They were open. They would always be open. She touched the sapphire ring on her finger. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like an anchor. She had been left to starve in the cold, but she had found a fire that would burn for eternity. And that is the story of Adeline and the Duke. From a frozen outcast to the most powerful woman in England, she proved that even when the world leaves you to freeze, the fire inside you can burn brighter than anything else. What did you think of Adeline's revenge on Beatrice? Was it too harsh, or did they get exactly what they deserved? And what about Valerius? Did he redeem himself in the end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story warmed your heart or gave you chills, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a daily dose of romance, drama, and karma. Until next time, keep your chin up, and remember, the best revenge is living well. Thanks for watching.